The morning sun cast long shadows across the Blackwater Security Training Facility as Marcus Thompson pushed his cleaning cart down the hallway. The wheels squeaked rhythmically against the polished concrete floor, a sound that had become as familiar to him as his own heartbeat over the past 3 years. At 52, Marcus had learned to move through the world quietly, almost invisibly, which suited him just fine. The facility buzzed with its usual pre-dawn activity. Elite military contractors, former special forces operators, and law enforcement professionals filled the corridors, their conversations peppered with tactical jargon and war stories. Marcus had heard it all before, countless times, as he emptied trash cans and mopped floors around their feet. To them, he was just the janitor, a gray-haired man in a faded blue uniform who kept their training grounds clean. Commander Jake Harrison's voice boomed from the main briefing room as Marcus approached with his cart. Harrison was a legend around here, a former Navy SEAL Team 6 operator who now ran the facility's advanced marksmanship program. His reputation preceded him wherever he went, and he never let anyone forget it. "Listen up, people," Harrison's gravelly voice carried through the partially open door. "What you're about to see today separates the professionals from the pretenders. This isn't your basic qualification course. This is precision shooting at its finest, the kind of skills that only come from years of elite military training." Marcus paused his cart outside the door, not intentionally eavesdropping, but finding himself drawn to the familiar rhythm of Harrison's briefing. He'd heard variations of this speech dozens of times before. "The targets are positioned at 400 meters," Harrison continued. "Wind conditions are variable, ranging from 8 to 12 knots from the southwest. You'll have 10 rounds to engage 10 different targets, each no larger than a playing card. Miss more than 2, and you're out of the program." Through the crack in the door, Marcus could see the assembled group of trainees. 24 men and women, all with impressive military backgrounds. Former Rangers, Marines, Green Berets, and even a few XSLS. Each one had paid substantial fees to train under Harrison's tutelage. "Now, before we head to the range," Harrison's voice took on that particular tone of arrogance that Marcus had grown accustomed to. "Let me remind you that precision shooting isn't just about having good equipment or following procedures. It's about having the right background, the right training, the right mindset. It's about being forged in the crucible of real combat." Sarah Chun, a former Marine sniper, raised her hand. "Commander, what's the facility record for this course?" Harrison's chest puffed with obvious pride. 10 for 10, 0 misses. Set by yours truly during the first year we implemented this program. And before you ask, yes, that record has stood for 5 years. Why? Because this level of shooting requires a very specific skill set that you just don't find in civilian training. Marcus resumed pushing his cart, the squeaking wheels announcing his presence as he entered the room to empty the waste baskets. The conversation died down slightly as the trainees noticed him, their attention shifting momentarily before returning to Harrison. "As I was saying," Harrison continued, barely acknowledging Marcus's presence, "true precision shooting is an art form that requires years of military conditioning. The muscle memory, the stress management, the ability to perform under pressure. These aren't things you can learn from a book or pick up at your local shooting range." Marcus worked methodically around the room, collecting empty coffee cups and clearing white bards. He'd developed a system over the years that allowed him to complete his tasks efficiently while remaining unobtrusive. The trainees barely registered his existence, which was exactly how he preferred it. "I've seen civilian marksmen who think they're hot stuff because they can hit targets at 100 yards, Harrison scoffed. "But put them under real pressure, give them challenging conditions, and they fold like a house of cards. Military training creates a different breed of shooter altogether." Tom Rodriguez, a former Army Ranger, nodded in agreement. "It's that mental toughness that makes the difference. Knowing that lives depend on every shot changes everything." "Exactly," Harrison replied. "That's why programs like this exist. To separate those who have what it takes from those who just think they do. The civilian world is full of weekend warriors who watch too many movies and think they understand what real shooting is all about. Marcus finished emptying the last wastebasket and began pushing his cart toward the door. As he did, he overheard Harrison continuing his lecture. The bottom line is this: the kind of shooting we're going to do today requires a very specific pedigree. Navy SEALs, Army Special Forces, Marine Scout snipers, that's where real marksmen come from. No one else has the foundation necessary to perform at this level. The words hung in the air as Marcus exited the briefing room. He'd heard similar statements countless times before, not just from Harrison, but from many of the instructors and trainees who passed through the facility. It was a common belief in military circles that elite shooting skills were the exclusive domain of those with special operations backgrounds. Marcus pushed his cart down the hallway toward the next room on his route. The facility was laid out like a small campus, with multiple buildings housing different training programs. The main building contained classrooms and offices, while several outbuildings housed specialized training equipment and, most importantly, the various shooting ranges. As he worked his way through the administrative offices, Marcus's mind wandered to memories he rarely allowed himself to revisit. Memories of a different time, a different life, when he wore a different uniform and carried different responsibilities. But those days were long behind him now, buried under years of deliberate anonymity and careful reinvention. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the facility's director, emerged from her office carrying a stack of files. She was one of the few people at the facility who consistently treated Marcus with respect, always greeting him by name and occasionally engaging in brief conversations about his work. "Good morning, Marcus," she said warmly. "How are you doing today?" "Morning, Dr. Warren. Doing well, thank you. How's your day shaping up?" "Busy as always. We've got Harrison's advanced course starting today, plus 2 other programs running simultaneously. Keeps things interesting." She paused, studying his face. "You know, Marcus, I've always been curious about something. You seem to know an awful lot about the training that goes on here. Have you given any thought to maybe participating in some of the programs yourself?" Marcus smiled politely while continuing to dust the reception area furniture. "Oh, I don't think that would be appropriate, ma'am. I'm just here to keep things clean and running smoothly. Besides, I'm probably too old to be playing with the young folks." "Age is just a number," Dr. Warren replied. "Some of our best performers have been older students who bring life experience to their training. Think about it. Anyway, the employee discount makes the programs quite affordable." She headed toward the exit, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. Dr. Warren's offer wasn't the first of its kind. Over the years, several instructors had made casual suggestions that he might enjoy trying some of the shooting programs. Marcus always deflected these invitations politely, maintaining his carefully constructed image as simply the facility's maintenance man. The truth was more complicated than anyone knew. Marcus had good reasons for keeping his past hidden, reasons that went beyond simple modesty or a lack of confidence. He'd spent years building a quiet, unremarkable life, and he had no intention of disrupting that now. As the morning progressed, Marcus continued his rounds. The facility was a complex operation, requiring constant maintenance and attention to detail. In addition to the main building, there were equipment storage facilities, vehicle maintenance areas, and multiple outdoor ranges. Each area had its own requirements and schedule. Around 10 o'clock, Marcus found himself near the outdoor rifle range where Harrison's group would be conducting their training. The range was an impressive setup, with covered firing positions, electronic target systems, and a clear field of fire extending out to 800 meters. Marcus had serviced this area countless times, emptying brass collection containers and maintaining the equipment. He could hear the group approaching from the main building, Harrison's voice carrying across the open space as he continued his instruction. Marcus quickly finished his tasks and began moving his cart away from the range area. He learned early in his tenure that it was best to avoid being around during active training sessions. "All right, people," Harrison's voice grew louder as the group reached the range. "This is where we separate the wheat from the chaff. The conditions today are actually quite challenging, We've got variable winds, and the morning light is creating some tricky shadows on the targets. Marcus paused behind a storage building, not wanting to interrupt the session by pushing his squeaky cart past the firing line. From his position, he could observe the setup without being in the way. Harrison had arranged the targets in a complex pattern at the 400-meter line. Each target was indeed about the size of a playing card, and they were positioned at different heights and angles to create maximum difficulty. The morning sun created a challenging backdrop, and the wind was clearly affecting the range flags. Before we begin, Harrison announced, let me remind you that this course has a 90% failure rate. Most people simply don't have the skill set necessary to succeed. This isn't a reflection on your abilities as operators or law enforcement professionals. It's simply recognition that precision shooting at this level requires very specific training and experience. The trainees began setting up their rifles at the firing positions. Marcus recognized most of the weapons, high-end precision rifles worth more than many people's cars. The shooters themselves looked professional and confident, their movements displaying the efficiency that came from extensive military training. Sarah Chun was the first to take her position. Her rifle was a custom-built .308 with a high-end scope, and her shooting position showed textbook form. She worked through her pre-shot routine methodically, adjusting for wind and range conditions. Take your time, Chun, Harrison called out. Remember, this isn't about speed. It's about precision under pressure. Chun's first shot rang out across the range. Marcus watched through a pair of binoculars that he'd found abandoned in the storage building. The electronic target system immediately displayed the result. A hit, but barely within the scoring zone. Good shot, Harrison commented, though his tone suggested it wasn't quite good enough. Remember, you need to be perfect on at least 8 out of 10 to pass. Chun continued through her string of fire, her concentration evident in every movement. She managed 6 hits out of 10 rounds, a respectable showing that would have been excellent on most civilian ranges, but fell short of Harrison's standards. Not bad, but not good enough, Harrison announced as Chun finished. This is exactly what I'm talking about, people. Even with excellent military training, this level of precision is extremely difficult to achieve. One by one, the other trainees took their turns. Some performed better than others, but none managed to achieve the 8 hits required to pass the course. The best performance came from Rodriguez, who managed 7 hits, but even that fell short of Harrison's exacting standards. This is typical, Harrison explained to the group as the last shooter finished. Year after year, we see the same results. This course pushes people beyond their comfort zones, beyond what they've experienced in their military careers. It's designed to do exactly that. Marcus glanced at his watch and realized he needed to move to his next scheduled area. As he prepared to push his cart away from the storage building, he accidentally knocked over a metal bucket that had been sitting beside him. The clatter echoed across the range, drawing the attention of Harrison's group. Hey, Harrison's voice boomed across the distance. Who's over there? Marcus emerged from behind the building, pushing his cart and looking appropriately embarrassed. Sorry about that, Commander Harrison. Just finishing up some maintenance work. Didn't mean to interrupt your training. Harrison waved dismissively. No problem. Just keep it down. We're trying to run a professional program here. As Marcus pushed his cart past the firing line, one of the trainees called out jokingly, Hey, old-timer, want to give it a try? Maybe you can show us how it's done. The comment drew laughter from several of the other trainees. Harrison smiled indulgently at the joke before adding, I appreciate the humor, folks, but let's remember what we're dealing with here. This level of shooting requires years of specialized military training. No civilian, regardless of their interest or enthusiasm, has the background necessary to perform at this level. Marcus continued pushing his cart, outwardly maintaining his humble demeanor while inwardly noting the dismissive tone of Harrison's comment. He'd heard similar statements many times before, but something about today felt different. Perhaps it was the accumulation of years of being treated as invisible, or maybe it was the particular arrogance in Harrison's voice. As he reached the far end of the range, Marcus paused to empty a trash container near the equipment storage area. From this position, he had a clear view of the entire range setup. The targets that had defeated 24 experienced military professionals stood in neat rows, their small surfaces presenting a formidable challenge even to trained marksmen. Marcus found himself studying the range conditions with a practiced eye. The wind was indeed variable, switching between 8 and 12 knots, but the pattern was predictable if you knew what to look for. The morning light created shadows that would be challenging for inexperienced shooters, but the angles were consistent and could be compensated for with proper technique. Harrison was packing up his demonstration rifle, a precision instrument that probably cost more than Marcus made in 6 months. The commander was clearly disappointed in his student's performance, though he tried to mask it with professional encouragement. "Don't be discouraged by today's results," Harrison told the group. "This course is designed to be extremely difficult. We'll work on the fundamentals over the next few weeks, and some of you may eventually develop the skills necessary to pass. Remember, precision shooting is as much about mental discipline as it is about technical ability." Marcus finished his work and began pushing his cart toward the main building. As he walked, he found his mind analyzing the shooting problem that had just defeated 24 trained professionals. The range conditions weren't actually that challenging if you understood how to read them properly. The target size was small, but not impossibly so. The real difficulty lay in maintaining consistency across 10 shots while managing the psychological pressure of knowing that each shot mattered. Back in the main building, Marcus resumed his normal routine. He cleaned restrooms, emptied offices, and maintained the common areas with the same methodical efficiency he'd displayed for 3 years. But throughout the day, his mind kept returning to the scene at the rifle range. By late afternoon, the facility had quieted down significantly. Most of the training programs concluded by 4 o'clock, leaving only a skeleton staff to handle administrative duties and maintenance. Marcus typically worked until 6, using the quiet hours to complete tasks that were difficult to accomplish during the busy training periods. As he worked alone in the main building, Marcus found himself thinking about Dr. Warren's earlier comment about participating in the training programs. He'd always dismissed such suggestions immediately, but today something felt different. Perhaps it was Harrison's absolute certainty that civilian shooters couldn't perform at elite levels, or maybe it was the accumulation of years of being treated as if he were invisible. Marcus had spent the better part of 3 years listening to instructors and students discuss shooting techniques, training methodologies, and performance standards. He'd absorbed countless hours of tactical instruction, ballistics discussions, and equipment evaluations. The irony wasn't lost on him that he probably had more exposure to advanced shooting instruction than many of the paying customers. As 6 o'clock approached, Marcus completed his final task for the day. He locked the cleaning supplies in their designated storage area, turned off the lights in the main building, and headed toward the parking lot where his aging pickup truck waited. The drive home took him through the small town of Cedar Ridge, population 8,500, where he'd made his quiet life for the past 5 years. His house was a modest 2-bedroom structure on the outskirts of town, surrounded by enough land to provide privacy, but not so much as to draw attention. It was exactly the kind of unremarkable home that suited his carefully constructed new identity. That evening, Marcus sat on his back porch with a cup of coffee, looking out over the rolling hills that surrounded his property. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, creating the kind of peaceful scene that had drawn him to this area in the first place. But tonight, the tranquility felt different somehow. Harrison's words kept echoing in his mind. No civilian, regardless of their interest or enthusiasm, has the background necessary to perform at this level. The absolute certainty in that statement bothered Marcus more than he wanted to admit. For 3 years, he'd been content to remain invisible, to live quietly and avoid drawing attention to himself. He'd built a new life based on anonymity and careful distance from his past. But something about today had stirred feelings he'd thought were safely buried. Marcus thought about the targets that had defeated 24 experienced shooters. He visualized the range conditions, the wind patterns, the lighting challenges. In his mind, he could see the solutions to each problem, the adjustments needed to achieve consistent accuracy. It wasn't theoretical knowledge. It was hard-earned experience that went back decades. As the evening light faded, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow, he would ask Dr. Warren about signing up for one of the shooting programs. Not Harrison's advanced course. That would be too obvious and potentially problematic. But perhaps a basic marksmanship class where he could test himself without drawing too much attention. The decision felt both liberating and terrifying. For years, he'd avoided any situation that might reveal his true capabilities or background. But Harrison's dismissive attitude toward civilian shooters had triggered something deep inside him, something that demanded a response. Marcus finished his coffee and headed inside to his computer. The Blackwater facility website listed several programs suitable for civilian participants. There was a basic rifle course that met on weekends, designed for hunters and recreational shooters who wanted to improve their skills. The course description emphasized that no prior experience was necessary, making it perfect for someone who wanted to appear as a beginner. He filled out the online registration form, using his real name, but providing minimal background information. The course fee was substantial, but thanks to the employee discount Dr. Warren had mentioned, it was manageable on his custodial salary. As he submitted the registration, Marcus felt a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. He was about to step out of the shadows he'd inhabited for 3 years, though hopefully not far enough to reveal his true identity. The challenge would be appearing to be exactly what everyone expected, a middle-aged janitor with an interest in learning to shoot. That night, Marcus lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with possibilities and concerns. Tomorrow would begin a new chapter in his carefully quiet life, one that would test his ability to maintain his cover while satisfying the urge to prove that Harrison's assumptions about civilian capabilities were dangerously wrong. The last thought that crossed his mind before sleep finally came was a memory from long ago, a voice from his past saying, "The best operators are the ones nobody sees coming." Tomorrow, he would begin to demonstrate the truth of those words in ways that would surprise everyone at the Blackwater facility, including himself. The weekend arrived with unseasonably cool weather that reminded Marcus of autumn mornings from another lifetime. He stood in his driveway at dawn, looking at the beat-up rifle case in the bed of his pickup truck. The case contained a weapon he hadn't touched in over 5 years, a standard hunting rifle he'd purchased shortly after moving to Cedar Ridge. It was nothing special, certainly not the high-end precision instruments favored by the Blackwater instructors, but it would have to do. Marcus had deliberately chosen the most basic equipment possible for his first shooting class. A simple bolt-action rifle, an inexpensive scope, and standard hunting ammunition. To any observer, he would appear exactly as he intended, an older man with modest means trying to learn new skill. The drive to the facility felt different on a Saturday morning. Instead of arriving before dawn for his custodial duties, Marcus was joining a group of paying customers for recreational training. He parked in the visitor area, something he'd never done before, and walked toward the main building carrying his rifle case and a small bag of equipment. The basic marksmanship class was taught by instructor Mike Sullivan, a former Marine who specialized in working with civilian students. Marcus had observed Sullivan's teaching style during his custodial work and knew him to be patient and methodical, quite different from the intense approach favored by Harrison and the other advanced instructors. 8 students had signed up for the weekend course, ranging in age from early 20s to late 60s. Marcus fit comfortably in the middle of the group, drawing no special attention as they assembled in the classroom for the initial instruction period. "Good morning, everyone," Sullivan began. "Welcome to basic rifle marksmanship. Over the next 2 days, we're going to cover the fundamentals of accurate shooting, safety procedures, and basic maintenance. Don't worry if you've never handled a rifle before. We'll start with the absolute basics. Marcus listened attentively as Sullivan covered topics he'd learned decades ago in a very different context. Breathing techniques, sight alignment, trigger control, body position, all familiar concepts presented in civilian-friendly terminology. He made sure to take notes like the other students, playing his role as an eager beginner. Jennifer Walsh, a young woman in her 20s, raised her hand. Instructor Sullivan, I've seen some of the advanced courses here at the facility. Do you think any of us could eventually work up to that level? Sullivan smiled diplomatically. Well, Jennifer, the advanced courses are designed for people with extensive military backgrounds. They require skills that take years to develop under very specific conditions. But there's no reason you can't become an excellent marksman within civilian standards. The distinction wasn't lost on Marcus. Even Sullivan, who is generally supportive of civilian shooters, maintained the belief that true precision shooting was the exclusive domain of military professionals. It was a mindset that seemed to permeate the entire facility. After 2 hours of classroom instruction, the group moved to the outdoor range for practical application. The basic course used targets at 100 meters, considerably closer than the 400-meter challenge that had defeated Harrison's advanced students. The targets themselves were also larger, standard bullseye designs that provided clear aiming points. Marcus positioned himself at the far end of the firing line, hoping to avoid drawing attention to his performance. He unpacked his modest rifle with deliberate clumsiness, fumbling slightly with the scope adjustments and taking extra time to set up his shooting position. To any observer, he appeared to be a complete beginner, struggling with unfamiliar equipment. "All right, everyone," Sullivan announced. "We'll start with 3 shots to zero your rifles. Don't worry about precision at this point. We just want to make sure your bullets are hitting the paper." The other students began firing, their shots producing the expected results for beginners. Most managed to hit the target somewhere, but the groups were scattered and inconsistent. Marcus waited until several others had fired before taking his turn. His first shot felt strange after years away from serious shooting. The rifle's recoil was heavier than the precision weapons he'd used in his previous life, and the trigger was rough compared to the finely tuned instruments he remembered. But muscle memory began to return as he settled into his shooting position. The shot broke cleanly, and Marcus watched through his scope as the bullet struck just outside the 10-ring. Close enough to indicate a properly zeroed rifle, but not so accurate as to draw unwanted attention. "Nice shot, Marcus," Sullivan called out. "Looks like you're a natural." Marcus smiled sheepishly and shrugged. "Beginner's luck, I guess." His second and third shots grouped near the first, creating a respectable pattern for a supposed novice. Good enough to show promise, not good enough to suggest any real experience. It was a careful balancing act that required deliberate misses and controlled performance. As the morning progressed, the other students warmed up to their instructor and began asking more questions. Marcus learned that Jennifer worked as a veterinarian and was interested in hunting. Bob Richardson was a retired accountant who'd always wanted to try target shooting. Mary Chun was a high school teacher preparing for a hunting trip with her husband. All of them were exactly what they appear to be, ordinary people with normal backgrounds trying to learn a new skill. Their struggles with basic marksmanship techniques were genuine, and their enthusiasm was infectious. Marcus found himself genuinely enjoying their company, something he hadn't expected. During the lunch break, the group gathered in the facility's cafeteria to eat sandwiches and continue their discussions about shooting. Marcus listened more than he spoke, maintaining his cover as a quiet custodial worker who was trying something new. "You know," Bob Richardson said between bites of his sandwich, "I've been thinking about what Instructor Sullivan said this morning about the advanced courses. Do you think there's really that big a difference between military and civilian shooting?" Jennifer nodded thoughtfully. "I mean, I understand that combat shooting is completely different from what we're doing, but pure marksmanship seems like it would be based on the same fundamentals, right?" "I think the difference is probably mental," Mary Chin suggested. "Military people have been trained to perform under pressure in ways that civilians never experience." Marcus found himself tempted to enter the conversation, but held back. These were exactly the kinds of discussions he'd been hearing for 3 years while cleaning around the edges of more advanced classes. The assumption that military training created fundamentally different capabilities was deeply ingrained in the facility's culture. I watched some of the advanced students practicing earlier this week, Bob said. Their targets were so small I could barely see them, even with binoculars. I can't imagine ever being able to shoot like that. Different league entirely, Jennifer agreed. We're just playing around compared to what those folks can do. After lunch, Sullivan led the group through more advanced exercises. They practiced shooting from different positions, sitting, kneeling, and prone. They learned to adjust for wind conditions and worked on consistency across multiple shot strings. Marcus continued his careful performance, showing steady improvement without displaying any unusual aptitude. He made sure to ask appropriate questions and occasionally struggled with concepts that would have been second nature to someone with his background. But as the afternoon wore on, Marcus found it increasingly difficult to maintain his deliberately mediocre performance. The fundamentals of precision shooting were coming back to him naturally, and his body wanted to perform at levels far beyond what his cover story would support. During one exercise, Sullivan had the students engage targets at varying distances to practice range estimation and scope adjustment. Marcus deliberately miscalculated his first adjustment, sending a shot wide of the target. But his second shot, intended to show improvement, struck almost dead center. "Wow, Marcus," Sullivan observed. "That's quite an improvement. You're picking this up remarkably quickly." "Thank you, sir. I guess those breathing exercises you taught us really help." Sullivan nodded approvingly, but Marcus caught a brief look of curiosity in the instructor's eyes. He made a mental note to be more careful about showing too much progress too quickly. As the first day of training concluded, the group gathered their equipment and prepared to leave. Most of the students expressed enthusiasm about returning for the second day, comparing notes about their performance and discussing areas where they wanted to improve. "Same time tomorrow," Sullivan announced. "We'll start with a review of today's lessons and then move on to some more advanced techniques. Great work, everyone. You should all be proud of your progress." Marcus packed his rifle carefully, maintaining the slightly awkward movements of someone still unfamiliar with his equipment. As he prepared to leave, Sullivan approached him privately. "Marcus, I wanted to compliment you on your performance today. You've got excellent concentration, and you're following instructions very well. Have you done any shooting before?" "No, sir. This is my first time with a rifle. I've always been curious about it, but never had the opportunity until now." Sullivan studied his face for a moment. "Well, you're demonstrating natural aptitude. If you decide to continue with shooting sports, you might want to consider some of our intermediate courses." "That's very kind of you to say. I'm just hoping I can keep up with everyone else tomorrow." The drive home gave Marcus time to reflect on his first day back on a shooting range. The experience had been both familiar and strange, like returning to a childhood home after many years away. The muscle memory was still there, buried under years of deliberate disuse, but ready to resurface when called upon. More challenging than the physical aspects of shooting was maintaining his cover story. Every instinct told him to perform at his actual capability level, to demonstrate the precision that had once defined his professional identity. Forcing himself to shoot poorly enough to maintain credibility as a beginner required constant mental discipline. That evening, Marcus sat on his back porch again, thinking about the day's events and the decision that lay ahead. Tomorrow would complete the basic course, after which he could return to his quiet life as if nothing had happened. Or he could take the next step and sign up for more advanced training. The logical choice was to stop here. He'd scratched the itch that Harrison's dismissive comments had created, proved to himself that his skills were still intact, and done so without drawing dangerous attention. Continuing down this path would only increase the risk of exposure. But something about the day had awakened feelings Marcus thought he'd successfully buried. The satisfaction of precise shooting, the challenge of reading conditions and making adjustments, the pure technical excellence required to achieve consistent accuracy. These were aspects of his former life that he genuinely missed. More than that, he found himself increasingly bothered by the casual dismissal of civilian capabilities that permeated the facility's culture. Harrison's absolute certainty that no non-military person could perform at elite levels felt like a challenge that demanded a response. As night fell, Marcus made another decision that surprised himself. He would complete the basic course tomorrow, but he would also begin preparing for something more ambitious. If he was going to prove a point about civilian shooting capabilities, he needed to do it in a way that would be impossible to ignore or dismiss. The advanced precision course that had defeated 24 military professionals offered exactly that opportunity. But attempting it would require careful preparation and a level of performance that might reveal more about his background than he was comfortable sharing. Marcus spent the evening researching the facility's intermediate courses, looking for a pathway that would allow him to build credibility gradually. The intermediate precision course met once a month and accepted students who had completed basic training. From there, students who demonstrated exceptional ability could petition to attempt the advanced course. It was a long-term plan that would require months of careful performance management. He would need to show steady improvement without revealing the full extent of his capabilities until the moment came to make his point definitively. The plan was risky, potentially exposing him to exactly the kind of attention he'd spent years avoiding. But the alternative was returning to his invisible life while carrying the knowledge that he'd allowed Harrison's arrogant assumptions to go unchallenged. As Marcus prepared for bed that night, he realized he'd already made his choice. Tomorrow would be just the beginning of a much longer journey, one that would test not only his shooting skills, but his ability to maintain his carefully constructed identity while proving that exceptional marksmanship wasn't limited to those with military pedigrees. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect conditions for the final day of basic training. Marcus arrived at the facility with the same modest equipment and unassuming demeanor, but internally he felt different. Yesterday, he'd been testing himself quietly. Today, he was beginning a campaign that would ultimately challenge everything the facility's instructors believed about civilian shooting capabilities. Sullivan greeted the returning students with enthusiasm and outlined the day's agenda. They would practice more advanced shooting positions, work on target transitions, and conclude with a qualification course that would test everything they'd learned. Today's qualification requires 5 shots at 100 meters, Sullivan explained. You need to keep all 5 shots within the 8 ring to pass. It's not easy, but everyone who's been paying attention should be able to manage it. Marcus listened to the requirements while calculating the challenge they represented. For a true beginner, keeping 5 shots within the 8 ring at 100 meters would indeed be difficult. For someone with his background, it would be almost impossible to miss while maintaining credibility as a novice. The morning exercises went smoothly, with Marcus continuing his careful performance of steady but unspectacular improvement. He helped other students with minor technical issues, playing the role of an older man who was methodical and observant but not particularly talented. When the time came for the qualification course, Marcus watched the other students shoot first. Jennifer managed 4 shots in the 8 ring, missing by inches on her 5th shot. Bob achieved 3 good shots before losing concentration. Mary surprised everyone by keeping all 5 shots within the required zone, earning congratulations from Sullivan and the other students. Marcus stepped to the firing line for his turn, acutely aware that his performance here would set the stage for everything that followed. Too good, and he risked raising suspicions. Too poor, and he might not qualify for intermediate courses. He settled into his shooting position with practiced ease, then deliberately introduced slight flaws in his form that would affect precision without being obvious to casual observation. His breathing rhythm was slightly irregular, his grip pressure inconsistent, his sight alignment just marginally off. The first shot broke cleanly and struck within the 9 ring, good shooting for a beginner, but not suspiciously accurate. The second shot grouped closely with the first. Marcus adjusted his position slightly, introducing a different minor flaw that would shift his point of impact while maintaining the appearance of someone still learning to manage recoil and follow through. His final 3 shots created a respectable group that easily met the qualification standard while looking exactly like the work of a careful beginner who'd absorb his lessons well. The total group size was larger than Marcus could have achieved accidentally, but small enough to demonstrate solid fundamental technique. "Excellent work, Marcus," Sullivan called out. "That's some very consistent shooting. You should definitely consider continuing with intermediate training." The other students offered their congratulations, and Marcus accepted them with appropriate humility. Inside, he felt the familiar satisfaction of a successful mission, even though this particular mission was just getting started. As the basic course concluded, Sullivan handed out certificates and provided information about advanced training opportunities. Marcus accepted his certificate with visible pride while listening to Sullivan's description of the intermediate precision course. "The intermediate course is significantly more challenging," Sullivan explained. "We shoot at longer ranges, use smaller targets, and introduce more complex wind and lighting conditions. It's designed for people who want to take their shooting to the next level." "How does it compare to the advanced courses?" Jennifer asked. "Well, the advanced courses are in a different category altogether. Those are designed for military and law enforcement professionals who need to perform under extreme conditions. But the intermediate course will definitely challenge civilian shooters and help you develop precision skills well beyond basic hunting accuracy." Marcus filed away this information while maintaining his expression of polite interest. The intermediate course would be his next step, a way to gradually reveal improved capabilities while building toward his ultimate goal. As the students packed their equipment and prepared to leave, Marcus approached Sullivan privately. "Instructor Sullivan, I wanted to thank you for your patience this weekend. I learned a tremendous amount, and I'm definitely interested in continuing my training." "I'm glad to hear that, Marcus. You've got natural ability and the right attitude for precision shooting. The intermediate course starts next month. I think you do well in it. I'll definitely sign up. Is there anything I should practice between now and then?" Sullivan considered the question thoughtfully. "Focus on the fundamentals we covered this weekend. Dry fire practice at home will help with your trigger control, and if you can get to a local range, work on consistency rather than try to shrink your group sizes." Marcus nodded seriously, though he knew his practice routine would be quite different from what Sullivan was suggesting. He had a month to prepare for intermediate training, and he intended to use that time to carefully calibrate his performance for the next phase of his plan. The drive home felt different from the previous day. Yesterday, he'd been testing whether he still had the skills necessary to compete at high levels. Today, he knew with certainty that those skills were intact and that he could control his performance precisely enough to maintain his cover while gradually revealing his capabilities. Over the next month, Marcus would need to practice more than just shooting. He would need to perfect the art of controlled revelation, showing just enough improvement to justify advancing to more challenging courses while avoiding the kind of dramatic progress that might raise uncomfortable questions about his background. But for now, Marcus was satisfied with his first step back into a world he'd left behind years ago. The basic course certificate in his truck represented more than just a shooting qualification. It was his entry ticket into a longer campaign that would ultimately prove that exceptional marksmanship wasn't limited to those with military pedigrees. As he pulled into his driveway that evening, Marcus reflected on the weekend's events and the path that lay ahead. Tomorrow he would return to his job as the facility's invisible custodian, but he would no longer be just observing the training programs. He would be preparing to participate in them at a level that would challenge every assumption the instructors held about civilian capabilities. The thought both excited and worried him, but Marcus had already committed to the course of action. In 1 month, he would begin intermediate training, taking the next step toward an eventual confrontation with Harrison's certainty that precision shooting was exclusively the domain of military professionals. The janitor who cleaned the floors and emptied the trash cans was about to become something much more dangerous. A civilian shooter with the skills to prove that exceptional marksmanship could come from unexpected places, and that sometimes the most dangerous opponents were the ones nobody saw coming. 3 months had passed since Marcus completed the basic marksmanship course, and his carefully orchestrated progression through the facility's training programs was proceeding exactly as planned. The intermediate precision course had challenged him to reveal more of his capabilities while maintaining his cover as a dedicated amateur. Now, after consistently impressive but not suspicious performances, he found himself qualified to attempt something that would have seemed impossible when this journey began. Marcus stood in Dr. Warren's office on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, having requested a meeting during his lunch break. The director looked up from her paperwork with the same warm expression she'd always shown him, though there was something new in her eyes, a hint of curiosity about the custodian who'd been making waves in the shooting programs. "Marcus, please have a seat. I understand you wanted to discuss your training progress." "Yes, ma'am. I wanted to talk to you about petitioning for the advanced precision course." Dr. Warren's eyebrows rose slightly. She'd been following Marcus's unusual journey through her facility's programs with growing interest. A custodial employee who'd progressed from complete beginner to intermediate marksman in just 3 months was certainly noteworthy, though not unprecedented. "That's quite an ambitious goal, Marcus. The advanced course has very strict requirements. Commander Harrison doesn't accept students lightly." "I understand, ma'am. Instructor Sullivan thinks I might be ready, and I've met all the qualification standards." Dr. Warren pulled up Marcus's training file on her computer. The record showed steady progression through increasingly challenging courses, with scores that demonstrated genuine precision shooting ability. His intermediate course instructors had noted his exceptional concentration, methodical approach, and unusual consistency for someone with so little experience. "Your scores are certainly impressive," she admitted. "But, Marcus, you need to understand what you're asking for. The advanced course isn't just about shooting accuracy. It's about performing under extreme pressure, in challenging conditions, with zero margin for error. Most of our students in that program are former military personnel with combat experience." "I realize it's a big step up, Dr. Warren, but I feel like I've learned everything I can from the lower-level courses. I'm ready for a real challenge." Dr. Warren studied his file more carefully. Marcus Thompson, 52 years old, employed as a custodian for 3 years, no listed military service or previous shooting experience. On paper, he was exactly what he appeared to be, a middle-aged man who discovered a talent for precision shooting later in life. Yet something about his progression troubled her. The improvement curve was almost too perfect, as if he were following a predetermined plan rather than experiencing the normal struggles of a developing marksman. His instructors consistently noted his calm demeanor under pressure, his intuitive understanding of ballistics principles, and his ability to make complex adjustments that typically required years of experience to master. "Marcus, can I ask you something? Your progress has been remarkable, almost unprecedented for someone starting with no background. Are you sure you haven't had any previous shooting experience?" Marcus met her gaze steadily, having prepared for this question. "Ma'am, I grew up in a family that didn't believe in firearms. Never even held one until I started taking classes here. I think maybe I just have a natural aptitude, and I've been very focused on learning everything I can." It wasn't technically a lie. Marcus had indeed grown up in a family that discouraged civilian firearm ownership, though that family had also produced a son who would eventually serve his country in ways that required exceptional marksmanship skills. The distinction was subtle, but important to maintaining his carefully constructed narrative. Well, natural talent or not, petitioning for Harrison's course is a significant decision. The failure rate is extremely high, and the cost is substantial. Are you prepared for the possibility that you might not succeed? "I understand the risks, ma'am, but I feel like I need to find out what I'm truly capable of. The intermediate courses have been valuable, but they're not pushing me to my limits anymore." Dr. Warren made some notes in his file while considering the implications of his request. Allowing a custodial employee to attempt the facility's most prestigious course could set an interesting precedent, particularly if he succeeded. On the other hand, if he failed dramatically, It might reinforce the prevailing belief that such training was beyond civilian capabilities. "I'll need to discuss this with Commander Harrison," she finally said. "The decision to accept students into the advanced course is ultimately his. I'll present your petition and your training record, but I want you to understand that he may have reservations about accepting someone without military background." "I understand completely, Dr. Warren. I appreciate you considering my request. Give me a few days to arrange a meeting with Harrison. In the meantime, I suggest you continue practicing. If he agrees to evaluate you, he'll expect a demonstration of your current capabilities before making a final decision." Marcus left Dr. Warren's office feeling both anticipation and apprehension. The next few days would determine whether his carefully planned progression would culminate in the confrontation he'd been working toward for months. 2 days later, Dr. Warren called Marcus to inform him that Harrison had agreed to evaluate his petition. The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday, during Marcus's lunch break, and would include a practical shooting assessment on a range. "He seemed surprised by your request," Dr. Warren admitted over the phone, "but he's willing to give you a fair evaluation. Make sure you bring your best game." "Marcus, this is going to be challenging." That weekend, Marcus allowed himself to practice at his full capability for the first time in months. He drove to a private range an hour from Cedar Ridge, where he could shoot without being observed by anyone from the facility. Using the same modest rifle he'd carried throughout his training progression, he engaged targets at distances and difficulties that matched Harrison's advanced course requirements. The muscle memory was still perfect. Years of enforced restraint fell away as Marcus settled into shooting positions that felt as natural as breathing. His groups at 400 meters were consistently smaller than playing cards. His wind reading was intuitive and precise, and his performance under self-imposed pressure showed no degradation from his prime years. As he packed his equipment after the practice session, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. 3 months ago, he'd been content to remain invisible, to live quietly, and avoid any situation that might reveal his true capabilities. Now he was preparing to demonstrate those capabilities in front of the one person at the facility whose opinion would matter most. Monday arrived with perfect shooting weather, calm winds, clear skies, and the kind of steady light that eliminated most environmental variables. Marcus reported to Dr. Warren's office at exactly noon, carrying his rifle case and wearing the same modest shooting clothes he'd used throughout his training. Commander Harrison was already present, studying Marcus's training file with the same intensity he brought to everything. At 55, Harrison still carried himself with the bearing of an active-duty operator, and his reputation as both marksman and instructor was unquestioned throughout the facility. "Thompson," Harrison said without preamble, "Dr. Warren tells me you think you're ready for advanced precision training. I have to say, that's an unusual request coming from someone with your background." "Yes, sir. I understand it's not typical, but I feel like I've progressed as far as possible through the regular programs." Harrison closed the file and looked at Marcus directly. "Let me be clear about something. The advanced course isn't just about being able to shoot small groups. It's about performing under extreme pressure in challenging conditions with standards that most people simply cannot meet. I've had Navy SEALs fail this course. I understand, sir. I'm prepared for that level of challenge. We'll see. Dr. Warren has arranged for a practical evaluation. You'll attempt the same qualification that all advanced students must pass. 10 shots at 400 meters, targets the size of playing cards, variable wind conditions. You need 8 hits to qualify for admission to the course." Marcus nodded, recognizing the same challenge that had defeated 24 military professionals just 3 months earlier. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was about to attempt the very course that had prompted this entire journey. The three of them walked to the outdoor range where Harrison's advanced course conducted its training. The target array was already set up at the 400-meter line, 10 small squares barely visible even through binoculars. Range flags showed wind conditions that were moderately challenging but not extreme. "Standard rules," Harrison announced as they reached the firing line. 10 minutes to set up and Engage all targets. Wind conditions are your responsibility to read and adjust for. Questions? No, sir. Marcus began unpacking his modest rifle with the same careful movements he'd used throughout his training progression. Harrison watched with obvious skepticism, clearly expecting the attempt to end in failure within the first few shots. As Marcus settled into his shooting position, he allowed himself to acknowledge the magnitude of what he was about to do. For months, he'd carefully concealed his true capabilities behind the facade of a dedicated amateur. Now, for the first time since beginning his progression through the facilities programs, he was going to shoot at his actual skill level. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. Marcus's entire demeanor changed as he assumed the shooting position that had been burned into his muscle memory through thousands of hours of training decades earlier. His movements became economical and precise, his breathing settled into the perfect rhythm, and his focus narrowed to the specific challenge before him. Harrison noticed a change immediately. The hesitant amateur who'd been fumbling with equipment moments before had been replaced by someone who radiated quiet competence and professional skill. The way Marcus held his rifle, positioned his body, and prepared for the shot sequence spoke of experience far beyond anything his training record could explain. Interesting, Harrison muttered to Dr. Warren, but his comment was cut short as Marcus fired his first shot. The electronic target system immediately displayed the result. A direct hit in the center of the first target. Marcus cycled his bolt and smoothly transitioned to the second target without any apparent effort. The second shot was another center hit. By the fifth shot, Harrison's skepticism had transformed into intense curiosity. Marcus was shooting with mechanical precision, his technique flawless, and his results consistent. Each shot was a center hit delivered with the kind of calm efficiency that spoke of extensive experience under pressure. Where did you learn to shoot like that? Harrison called out, unable to contain his questions any longer. Marcus paused briefly in his shot sequence. Just been practicing what you folks taught me, sir. The response was technically accurate, but completely inadequate to explain what Harrison was witnessing. Marcus resumed firing, and his remaining 5 shots continued the pattern of precise execution. When the sequence was complete, the electronic system displayed the results. 10 shots, 10 hits, all within the required scoring zone. Harrison stood in silence for a long moment, processing what he'd just witnessed. The custodian who cleaned his offices had just delivered a perfect score on a qualification course that had defeated dozens of military professionals. The performance was not just technically impressive, it was virtually impossible for someone with the background and experience Marcus claimed to have. Thompson, Harrison said slowly, I've been teaching advanced marksmanship for 15 years. I've trained Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Marine snipers, and every other type of military marksman you can imagine. What you just demonstrated is not amateur shooting. That was professional-level precision delivered under pressure without any apparent stress. Marcus began packing his rifle, maintaining his calm demeanor while internally preparing for the questions he knew were coming. I appreciate the compliment, sir. I've been working very hard to improve my skills. Hard work doesn't explain what I just saw. Your shooting position, your breathing technique, your target transitions. Everything about your performance suggests extensive military or law enforcement training. Are you going to tell me what your real background is? Dr. Warren stepped forward, sensing the tension in Harrison's voice. Marcus, if there's something about your experience that you haven't shared, this would be an appropriate time to discuss it. Marcus finished securing his rifle case and stood to face both administrators. He'd known this moment would come eventually, though he'd hoped to reveal his background on his own terms rather than under direct questioning. Sir, ma'am, I appreciate your curiosity about my performance, but I think the more important question is whether civilian shooters can perform at the level you require for advanced training. I believe I've just demonstrated that they can. Harrison's expression shifted from curiosity to understanding. You've been playing us this entire time. This whole progression through our programs, the beginner act, the gradual improvement. It's all been carefully orchestrated, hasn't it? I won't deny that I've been more focused on learning than I initially let on, sir. But everything I've told you about my background is true. I am a custodian. I don't have military service, and before I started taking classes here, I had never received formal shooting instruction. The last statement was technically accurate, though it omitted the substantial and formal instruction Marcus had received during his actual military service. His training had occurred in programs that officially didn't exist, conducted by instructors whose names weren't recorded in any database the facility could access. Thompson, I don't know what game you're playing, but professional marksmanship doesn't develop in 3 months regardless of natural talent or dedication. What you just demonstrated requires years of high-level training under combat conditions. Marcus realized he'd reached the moment of decision he'd been avoiding for months. He could continue maintaining his cover story, though it was becoming increasingly implausible, or he could reveal enough of his background to satisfy their questions while protecting the most sensitive aspects of his past. Commander Harrison, you said earlier that civilian shooters don't have the background necessary to perform at military levels. I want to prove that assumption wrong. Perhaps some civilians have more background than their current circumstances might suggest. The cryptic response only increased Harrison's frustration. Are you telling me you do have military experience? Because if you've been lying about your service record, that's a serious matter. I'm telling you that my current job as a custodian doesn't define the totality of my capabilities or experience. I've had opportunities to develop specialized skills that aren't reflected in my employment history. Dr. Warren intervened before Harrison could respond. Marcus, I think what Commander Harrison is asking for is some honesty about your background. Your performance today suggests training that goes far beyond what we've provided here at the facility. Marcus considered his options carefully. Complete disclosure was impossible. Too much of his actual service record was classified at levels that would require background investigations he couldn't afford. But some limited revelation might satisfy their immediate questions while allowing him to continue with his ultimate goal. Ma'am, sir, I understand your curiosity. Let me say this. There are civilian contractors who work in specialized roles that require advanced technical skills. Not everyone who develops military-level capabilities does so while wearing a military uniform. Sometimes people choose to step away from that world and pursue quieter lives for various personal reasons. The explanation provided just enough information to be plausible while maintaining the ambiguity Marcus needed to protect his true identity. It suggested a background in private security or contract work, which would explain his skills without raising the kind of questions that actual military service might generate. Harrison studied Marcus's face, clearly weighing the explanation against what he'd observed. Contractor work? Is that your story? And you decided to become a custodian because you wanted a quiet life? Sometimes people make career changes that prioritize personal satisfaction over professional prestige. Sir, I found my work here at the facility to be quite fulfilling, and I've enjoyed the opportunity to learn new skills through your training programs. And the Beginner Act, I want to learn your teaching methods and understand how civilian students typically progress. I thought it was important to experience the programs as they were designed, rather than trying to skip steps based on prior knowledge. The explanation was partially true, though it omitted the deeper motivations related to Harrison's dismissive attitude towards civilian capabilities. Marcus had indeed wanted to understand the facility's training methodology, though his primary goal had always been to prove a point about the assumptions that governed their approach to instruction. Dr. Warren looked between Marcus and Harrison, sensing that they'd reached some kind of resolution, though many questions remained unanswered. Well, regardless of your background, Marcus, your performance today was certainly impressive. Commander Harrison, does he qualify for admission to the advanced course? Harrison continued studying Marcus for a long moment before responding. His shooting meets the technical requirements. There's no question about that. But I have to say, Thompson, your approach to this whole situation troubles me. Advanced precision training is serious business, not a game or an experiment. I agree completely, sir. I assure you that if you accept me into the course, I'll treat it with the respect and seriousness it deserves. The course starts next month. Standard rules apply. You fail to meet standards on any evaluation, you're out. No exceptions, regardless of your mysterious background or impressive audition. Understood, sir. Harrison turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, Thompson. I don't know what point you think you're proving here, but precision shooting under real-world conditions is about more than just hitting targets. Don't assume that range performance translates automatically to field applications. After Harrison left, Dr. Warren remained with Marcus to discuss the practical details of enrolling in the advanced course. Her manner was friendly, but noticeably more formal than their previous interactions. Marcus, I won't pretend to understand everything that just happened here, but I want you to know that whatever your background might be, you're welcome to continue training at our facility. I do hope you'll be more forthcoming about your experience in the future. I appreciate your understanding, Dr. Warren. I realize my approach has been unconventional, but my intentions have always been positive. I'm sure they have. Just remember that trust is an important component of any training relationship. The more honest you can be with your instructors, the more they'll be able to help you achieve your goals. That evening, Marcus sat on his back porch reflecting on the day's events. His carefully orchestrated plan had succeeded in gaining admission to Harrison's advanced course, but the cost had been higher than anticipated. His cover as a simple custodian with natural shooting talent was now compromised, though he'd managed to avoid revealing the most sensitive aspects of his background. More importantly, he demonstrated to Harrison and Dr. Warren that their assumptions about civilian shooting capabilities were fundamentally flawed. The proof hadn't been subtle. His perfect score on the qualification course was impossible to dismiss or explain away as luck. But the real test still lay ahead. Admission to the advanced course was just the beginning. If Marcus truly wanted to prove his point about civilian marksmanship, he would need to excel in the most challenging training program the facility offered, competing directly against the military professionals who believed they had an inherent advantage in precision shooting. The next month would determine whether his years of careful preparation and months of strategic revelation would culminate in the definitive proof he sought, that exceptional marksmanship could emerge from unexpected backgrounds, and that sometimes the most dangerous shooters were the ones nobody saw coming. As Marcus prepared for bed that night, he realized that his quiet life as an invisible custodian was effectively over. Tomorrow he would return to work, but everyone would know that the man who cleaned their offices and emptied their trash cans was capable of precision shooting that matched or exceeded their own abilities. The transformation from invisible service worker to recognized marksman was complete, though the most important chapter of his story was still to be written. In 1 month, Marcus would take his place among the elite students in Harrison's advanced precision course, ready to prove once, and for all that military backgrounds didn't have a monopoly on exceptional shooting skills. The janitor who had spent 3 years listening to dismissive comments about civilian capabilities was about to become something much more significant. Living proof that expertise could come from the most unlikely sources and that assumptions about who could excel at precision marksmanship were dangerously wrong. Harrison's certainty that only military personnel could perform at elite levels was about to face its most serious challenge, delivered by a custodian who had spent months preparing for exactly this moment. The final test would determine not just whether Marcus could excel in advanced training, but whether the entire facility's understanding of marksmanship capabilities would need to be reconsidered. Marcus Thompson, the invisible janitor, was ready to step fully into the light and prove that sometimes the most impressive achievements came from the most unexpected sources. The stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge everything the Blackwater facility believed about the relationship between background and capability in the world of precision shooting.